Welcome to the War on Democracy weekly roundup, where we dive into the key events in the past week in the ongoing struggle to defend democracy worldwide. Before we get started, though, I do have one request to make of you all. If you enjoy this work, then pick one person you know, just one person, a family member, a friend, or a colleague who might find value in this, and share it with them. Democracy is under threat and it needs its defenders. And with your help, we can gather them together. But with that being said, it's been a really busy week. We have a new military alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, Russian jets again over Europe, and an increasingly dangerous assault on free speech in the United States. Firstly, we're going to touch on the Saudi Arabian-Pakistani front. The two major players in the Islamic world have signed a mutual defense pact. Now, an agreement like this has long been rumored, and when I say long, I mean decades. The deal, formerly known as the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement, or SMDA, was signed in Riyadh on the 17th of September by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. And there are a number of key provisions. Central to this is a mutual defense clause which states, quote, "Any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both." Now, on paper, this looks very similar to NATO's famous Article 5. However, some things are left quite ambiguous. Firstly, the nature of aggression. Does that refer only to force of arms or invasion or attack? Or would it also refer to diplomatic, political, or economic aggression? That would warrant a mutual response. Secondly, what kind of responses are envisaged? Purely military, political, economic, diplomatic? How far is it going to go? All of these seem to be fairly unclear. The second thing, the big explosive elephant in the room, is of course the bomb, the nuclear bomb. Pakistan has it, Saudi Arabia does not. Now, under the agreement though, Pakistan's nuclear program may be within Saudi reach. And Pakistan's defense minister, Karaja Mohammed Asif, said that his nation's nuclear program, quote, "will be made available," end quote, presumably to Saudi Arabia if needed. Now, it's significant that this agreement is now on paper and should come as no surprise, but why now? And to get a reasonable answer to that, we need to take a look at both nations, where they stand, and the current state of the world. Bear in mind that neither of these countries could be described accurately as a democracy at all. Saudi Arabia is an absolutist monarchy, and Pakistan is a military dictatorship of sorts, authoritarian, with a veneer of a sort of democratic system over it. Pakistan is one of the world's largest arms producers, especially of legacy ammunition. Think 152mm shells, think 7.62 AK ammunition, the old stuff. But it's also in a real strategic bind. They've just had a brief but relatively intense conflict with India, part of a long-standing rivalry that regularly flares up into border clashes. And these have become somewhat more serious when you bear in mind that both countries are nuclear armed. And Pakistan is a military dictatorship that suffers from deep and intransigent economic problems, leaving its coffers very light. And to add a cherry onto this unstable cake, it faces an ongoing insurgency, or insurgencies more accurately, that cost around 5 Pakistani military lives daily. It's strapped for cash. Money it needs to fight the insurgency, keep the military well supplied, maintain the generals in the manner of living to which they've become accustomed, London flats and regular foreign holidays, that sort of thing, and ensure that the security services have enough manpower and resources to prevent all of the above problems from flaring into popular revolt. They will have been watching Nepal very closely recently. Saudi Arabia has a rather different set of issues. Cash is not a problem for them. The Saudis swim in oil money. However, they have some rather difficult neighbors. The Houthis in Yemen have been blockading the Strait of Hormuz and taking a toll on the Saudi armed forces, while the Iranians, their key regional rival, are actively seeking the bomb. And the war in Gaza is, of course, much closer. Previously, the Saudis may have felt secure under American protection, being part of America's sphere within the Middle East. But then along came Mr. Trump, Israel, and bombs into Qatar. Now, a key selling point the Americans previously used in the Middle East was protection from conflict. Side with the US, and you would have an ample supply of export-grade US kit, the CIA on side, and it would be rather unlikely that you're going to get bombed anytime soon. Qatar took this deal, and the Israelis bombed them anyway in an attempt to kill Hamas leadership. They could not have done so without a nod, or at least a shrug, from the United States, and this has dispelled the notion of US protection in one fell swoop. The Saudis may have felt little need for the bomb before, or just sort of kept it in their back pocket in case the Iranians ever got it. But now, with Iran still pushing ahead in their program despite the 12-day war and the damage they suffered there, that might have changed. So, what's on offer? Who really gets what out of this? The Saudis get Pakistani military support and potential access to the bomb, and the Pakistanis get desperately needed Saudi cash. As for what happens to the Americans, well, they get frozen out a little more. There is, though, a shadow behind all of this, a dragon-shaped shadow. The Pakistanis are backed by China, and they will have jumped at the chance to push American influence a little more out of the region. Next, on to the Estonian front. On the 19th of September, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets violated Estonian airspace in the Gulf of Finland. They remained inside for about 12 minutes before NATO's air policing mission forced them out. The Russian jets had no flight plans, their transponders were off, and they failed to communicate with Estonian air traffic control. And this is the 4th such incursion into Estonian airspace this year, and follows hot on the heels of the Russian drone incursions into Poland and Romania. Estonia has activated NATO's Article 4, which calls for alliance-level meetings and consultations about the threat. And the Russians, for their part, have denied the allegations, claiming their flight did not cross the Estonian border. This is a lie. As with the drone raid, this is a test of NATO's resolve. And before we get into it, though, there are some myths that I feel must be dispelled. The first myth: Italian jets intercepted the Russians. NATO has no eastern air defense. Well, yes, Italian jets did intercept the Russians. No, they did not fly from Italy. They were based in Estonia as part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. Nations do this on rotation. A few months ago, it might have been the British RAF or American jets. 2. Russia sneaked into Estonia. How were they not detected earlier? Those jets would have been tracked and detected the moment they lifted. They are, well, they're hardly stealthy. They would have been seen, identified, and likely flight trajectories tracked miles away. And 3, they managed to fly over Estonia for 12 minutes. Well, yes and no. They were in Estonian airspace, certainly in the Gulf of Finland, over the sea. They never flew over Estonia itself. This sorted, let's discuss what this actually is. A provocation? Certainly. A test? Indeed. An accident? Don't be silly. And how could it have been avoided? Well, a stronger response to the earlier drone incursions, had the response to that incursion been swifter and perhaps kinetic, i.e. more assistance to Ukraine, Russia may not have felt secure enough to test NATO again. However, cold water does need to be poured on those demanding immediate retaliation. Take one step up the escalatory ladder and it can be very difficult to step back down. Being said, a more forceful response in future could be warranted. When a Russian jet encroached in Turkish airspace in 2015, it was promptly shot down. Perhaps we should take a leaf out of that book. Alternatively, an air patrol in western Ukraine to shoot down Russian drones and missiles has been repeatedly proposed, including by yours truly. As for the Estonians, well, at least one politician, Marko Mihkelson, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, made his intentions clear in a post on X. You can see it now. 17 seconds versus 12 minutes. Next time we're doing that, if you know what I mean. Well, if you want to hear more from Mr. Mihkelson, he was gracious enough to appear on my podcast, Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, which I link in the comments below. Onto the American front. The front which has been, well, it's been pretty busy lately. The fallout from the murder of conservative commentator and activist Charlie Kirk continues to rain down across the United States, and the results are looking as grim as many feared. The Trump administration has jumped on this event as an opportunity to attack political enemies and, many say, degrade the right to free speech. And Trump kicked it off, saying last week, quote, "The radical left causes tremendous violence," and added, "The radical left really has caused a lot of problems for this country. I really think they hate our country." And to him, the radical left appeared to be anybody vaguely on the left who disagrees with him. It's an extremely broad church. And he's gone on to threaten ABC News with an investigation. Attorney General Pam Bondi has vowed a crackdown on so-called hate speech, and the governor of Texas lauded the arrest of a student after she mocked Kirk's death at a vigil, although that is a pretty unpleasant thing to do. ABC suspended the comedian Jimmy Kimmel for saying, quote, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it." Now, he was suspended, and his show is now due to return after quite some significant public backlash. And there have been rumblings about removing the tax-exempt status of left-leaning organizations like the Ford Foundation or Open Society. And this is coupled with efforts to broaden what may count as political violence or even domestic terrorism. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said that the Justice Department will explore using the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, a law designed to combat the mob, Al Capone, to investigate protesters who shouted at Trump at a restaurant last week. And speaking to CNN, Blanche said that the protesters confronted Trump, quote, "with vile words and vile anger," and inferred that it may have been part of a, quote, "organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage to the United States." This is dangerous language. Trump additionally has recently signed an executive order that brands Antifa, or the anti-fascist movement, as a terrorist organization. Antifa is not an organization that has, say, a headquarters, registered anywhere. It's more of an idea, really. The alarm klaxons, though, are ringing. Erwin Cherminsky, the Dean of the University of California at Berkeley School of Law and a leading First Amendment free speech scholar, said that Trump is, quote, "very much wanting to use the tools of government to try to silence the speech that he does not like." And he added, "It's not a new playbook for people to use power in that way, but we've never seen a president do anything like this before." And the irony of this is, it's really stark. One of the first things Trump did in office was sign an executive order called Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship. And the content was pretty clear-cut. The order declared, quote, "The previous administration trampled free speech rights by censoring Americans' speech on online platforms, often by exerting substantial coercive pressure on third parties such as social media companies to moderate, deplatform, or otherwise suppress speech that the federal government did not approve. Good. So much for that, then. I think that's out of the window now. Although it must be pointed out that to many on the right, they're simply echoing what they've seen from the left for decades in terms of deplatforming, firings, and so on. It can be argued that the left abandoned free speech to some extent long ago, and now this may be coming back to bite them. And free speech is sacred. People can say unpleasant, horrible, and vile things, and that really ought to be protected. Because who's to say what's unpleasant or vile? So we should be very worried. This is straight out of the playbook that we've seen from authoritarians the world over, time and time again. However, Mr. Kimmel, although suspended, is now back. So there is still plenty of room to resist this kind of move. And if you are in the United States, I encourage you to do so. And I encourage you to do so from as bipartisan a stand as you can, because free speech is universal and is universally important. It is a means to the ends of a fairer society. And now onto terra firma, or the front to save the planet, because you can't really have liberty on a dead or dying world. I have some good news to report. The High Seas Treaty has received its 60th ratification and is set to become international law. Morocco signed it on Friday last, ensuring that the treaty will cross the essential threshold and be enforceable. And what this deal does is it paves the way for international waters, which is most of the world's oceans by a long old shot, to be placed into marine protected areas. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, covering more than 2/3 of the ocean, the agreement sets binding rules to conserve and sustainably use marine biodiversity. The treaty is set to put 30% of the world's oceans into marine protected areas. At the moment, it's just 1%. And Director General of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Kerstin Schwid, said that the treaty is, quote, a monumental achievement for ocean conservation. And she added, the High Seas Treaty will be a positive catalyst for collaboration across international waters and agreements, and is a turning point for 2/3 of the world's oceans that lie beyond national jurisdiction. Now, once the treaty is enforced, countries will propose areas to be protected, and which will then be voted on by the nations that signed up to the treaty. This is a really good thing. Our seas are vital for our survival, and they're filled with really cool animals that I really like. This treaty is a promise to our children. Let's keep it. Now finally, we go to other fronts around the world. Onto the Palestinian front, the UK, France and Australia have recognised the state of Palestine. What difference this way may make on the ground and the horrific situation there is as yet unknown. However, it does add more weight to a much needed two-state solution. Onto the Brazilian front, ex-president Bolsonaro got 27 years in prison for attempting a coup. But almost immediately, a bill has been put before the Chamber of Deputies by his supporters that would see him granted amnesty and freed, like every other person in Brazil who's attempted a coup d'etat. Protests against this have erupted across the country. Onto the Malawian front, police have arrested 8 for alleged election fraud as the country awaits results of last week's general election. And finally, the culinary front. I had some broke journalist channel the other day, pasta with nothing but butter and an unreasonable amount of black pepper, and it was actually surprisingly good. But I do find it kind of interesting that pepper is so cheap today. Go back a couple of 100 years, and that stuff was so expensive that it was used as currency. Well, that's all for this week. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And again, If you value this work, please do find that one individual that you think may enjoy it as well and share it with them, because we Democrats, we have friends everywhere. And always remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Thank you.